Today, I am upset. Why am I upset, may ask? Well, I had a discussion with my father. He's been gone for the last 2 weeks, and I mean, figured that, I'd talk with him about some of the things that, have been talked about in the world since he's been gone. Um, I talked a little bit about the Q&A episode with Brian Cox, though I wasn't really able to get in any sort of real depth with that with him. The He travels a lot, but there's this weird like gap where he just doesn't care about foreign politics. He's already got an opinion on it, and he is a conservative Christian, and everything that he says is right with no evidence. Now, that may be an outlandish claim to make, but I'm only 23. I realize that I don't know everything. In fact, I don't know even close to everything. That's why I go out and I do research. Pretty much every day, I'm reading news articles and scientific papers and just anything that I can, whatever challenges me in it on any particular day. That's what I'm going to learn more about. And I've learned a lot. In fact, I learn a lot every day. If I don't learn something, if I don't learn something in a day, then I have completely failed. It could be that even when I'm doing something that most would consider slacking off, like watching anime or something like that, I am learning Japanese separately, and the connection between what I learn from studying and what I learn from anime, they are connected. I hear words that I recognize, and I in one of the more recent episodes of Tokugeki no Soma or Food Wars, um, there's a lady who has absolutely terrible Japanese, and knowing some Japanese, I get it. I get why she's so terrible. But I learn a lot, and I'm not necessarily easily convinced of things. I guess it depends on what it is. I'd say that there are some areas in which I'm still gullible, but there are other areas in which I've made it an effort to know more, at least, than the average American does about these subjects. One of the subjects is Islam, which my dad quizzed me on, and I was able to get. I did better than the average American would. I told him the difference between Sunni, Shia, and Sufi um, Islam, though I don't know all of the differences. I know the basic differences, which is more than what a lot of people could say. I know that ISIS is comprised of Sunni Muslims, which is also, people would have to guess. But there's the difference between me and him is how we come to our conclusions. Now, he says that, okay, this was our conversation. Now, I wish that I had recorded it, because then I could have picked apart both what he said and what I said. I kept trying to do what were considered good techniques to do. I tried to steelman him by saying, I gave him credit where there was credit. When he made a claim that I already knew was at least had some evidence based around it, I was like, yes, there is that. And I tried to challenge him. I tried to make him think a little bit more. But it was so surprising how little he was thinking. I said that as an atheist, I am. We got into the what he considered a semantic argument about atheism. I had to correct him and say that atheism is believing that there is no God. It's not believing, which sounds like semantics, but any atheist will tell you that there's a pretty big difference. Knowing, knowing for sure, like saying that you know for sure that there is or is not a God is simply a ludicrous statement to make. It's like atheists sometimes realize this, and any atheist should make this clarification that we're not saying that we know for sure, but that we think that the evidence doesn't support it. It's a fairly simple claim. when I One of the instances was I said that I personally, um, though I did believe when I was young that since I've grown older, that I have come to know the Bible more personally in a literary and historical sense. And when you look at that, it becomes harder for me at least, it became harder and harder for me to justify believing in it. I mean, starting in probably middle or early high school. But the important thing about the conversation that my father and I had was evidence. Evidence. Now, being a reasonable, evidence based skeptic, I asked him to provide a single piece of evidence. I said, I want to believe you. I want you to make a good argument. Show me, I said, show me one piece of evidence that, even though we were talking about specifically the historicity of Jesus, I was generous. I said, give me a single piece of evidence that any of it is historically accurate, that any of it is divine, that any of it is what you say it is, that it's not contradictory. And he couldn't. He said that he told me that he had, at one point, a long time ago, done his and came to his conclusion and then mentally dumped that information. And there's a problem with that. That either suggests that the information that he received was so non-impacting that he really didn't look up anything at all. He went to sites that would confirm his bias and therefore is susceptible to confirmation bias, or he didn't really do it. And personally, though he claims that he was like me for a long time and was skeptical and an atheist, was that he believed, like, that he came to his beliefs and now he doesn't need any new information, and that he doesn't care, and that he doesn't have to give me evidence. And because evidence doesn't matter in religion. That's what he told me. He told me that the evidence doesn't matter, that I'm missing the point of Christianity. Ooh, man, so many things to talk about, but I'm gonna stick with evidence-based reasoning right here, and we're just gonna talk about that. The biggest offense, which we had a few points of contention and some points where we were doing okay conversationally and there wasn't any malice. Personally, actually, after the first probably 10-15 minutes of the discussion, I moved off the defensive because I realized that he wasn't going to give me evidence. We were trying to have a reasonable conversation, and I said that that the evidence that he provided, which was none was insufficient for me to believe. I posed a few questions to him, such as, do you believe that you're going to get into heaven? He says, probably. What about Catholics? Possibly. Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, Hindus. He said, possibly, to all those answers. And then I said atheist. Ah, well, there's your problem. You specifically don't believe in a God. Which I didn't raise the question at the time, though it would have been an excellent question to ask, is why would not believing in a God versus believing in the wrong God not get you into heaven? If you can believe in the wrong God and get into heaven, then if you can believe in the wrong God and get into heaven, why is not believing in any gods necessarily cause to go to hell? Now, of course, this is all from the standpoint of being a believer. If you believe that there is a heaven and that there is a hell. I mean, I had a number of questions for him that he simply couldn't answer adequately. I asked him, why is it that if God forgave sins in the Bible without requiring a blood sacrifice, which before I could actually get to, he cut me off so that we could go to dinner. But there's so many things that I'm like, where is your evidence? I pointed out some of the problems with historicity in the Bible, that it's like that I'm not even sure that Jesus existed, which is an unpopular view. Most people agree that Jesus did in fact exist, though he may not have been the religious figure that everyone claims that he is. Personally, I mean, unless there was, the first person that the first book of the New Testament is Galatians. Not in order of reading, but in order of that it was written. Gospels didn't come along until almost 40 or 50 years after Paul's first letters. I mean, even bringing up this point to him, and well, when you combine that with the other myths which Jesus parallels with, for example, Dionysus, Oedipus, that there are a lot of similarities, that it seems almost intentionally like he is being portrayed, the way that he's being portrayed is fictionalized. It almost seems intentional. The jab at the Dionysian mystery cult, or Dionysus, the Dionysus mystery cult, Dionysus being the Greek god of wine, at the point in which the story about Jesus turning water into wine was written, the Dionysus mystery cult had already been around for about 400 or 500 years. And scholars say that it was a jab at the Dionysus cult to in a way prove that Jesus was better by telling this story where not only did he make wine, he made wine out of water. He didn't even need grapes. But he says, so what? It doesn't matter. I talk about Genesis and Exodus and how there's no archaeological evidence for the events in those books occurring. And he says, but you're missing the point. You're missing the point of the Bible. And I pointed to Exodus 18:22, which says, "Thou shalt not stand a sorceress to live, which means that you should kill people who claim to practice witchcraft. Actually, later, other translations, you could use in Greek terms, sometimes pharmacist is the word that's used, which is kind of anti-scientific, directly anti-science and anti-medicine. But and yes, I do understand that pharmacists in that era had wildly different practices than pharmacists nowadays. But and then he proceeded to read the verses afterwards about killing homosexuals and also not, if you give money to a Jew, don't charge interest on it. It's like if you give a loan to a Jew, don't charge interest on it. Okay. I mean, it says from within your tribe. It's hard to say if he's talking specifically about Jews, which he is in Exodus. And he says, my dad says, oh, you're missing the meta narrative. What are they saying? What are they saying here? Like, well, it looks like in the meta narrative that this is where God is giving the law to Moses, the Israelites. I mean, we're still in the area of like the primitive law where it's before Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus, things like that. But I fail to see how that's irrelevant. No, you're missing the meta narrative. You're missing the meta narrative. What do you think that it's saying? It's the law. You should kill homosexuals, you should kill witches, and you should loan money to people without charging without charging interest because it's a good thing to do. No. Yeah. The meta narrative. It's saying that that you can't be perfect. That you need a savior. And I didn't even say, well, if Jesus wasn't even a real person, if there's no historicity to support Jesus, then why would I believe that Jesus is the person who came to save our sins? I didn't even get to that because he ended up getting so upset that I was trying to apply reason and logic to religion because they're entirely different spheres and they can't work within each other. He's like, well, he said that he figured that, some of Genesis and Exodus was stories. The flood, creation itself, Adam and Eve. That they're, stories to make a point. And then he mentioned, like, and I was like, and he said, it was like, oh, and, like the sun staying the same place in the sky for 11 days. And I was like, oh, yeah. I mean, that's a claim like that is simply ridiculous. The physical impossibility, either to stop the Earth's rotation, which is what you'd have to stop the Earth's rotation, which he just didn't seem to understand. I said that it was physically impossible, that it would literally destroy the world. Such an act would tear the world apart. To suddenly stop the Earth in its rotation? And he seemed incredulous, as if, I just didn't get it. I just didn't get it. But that's me. I'm looking here at the physics, and you see that something's traveling at thousands of miles per second around, like in this, like, rotating at this incredible speed. To suddenly stop it, the effect on the core, the effect on the Earth, the effect on the people, inertia. I mean, there are a lot of questions and a lot of problems with such a miracle. I mean, it would truly have to be a miracle
for something like that to not become an extinction event. That would be the true miracle. Not the Earth stopping, but the Earth stopping, not being destroyed, and then starting again right back up. I mean, such a miracle may work if you believe in a flat Earth, but such an argument doesn't work in the face of evidence and reason it, in our reality, where the Earth is a mostly sphere that goes in an elliptical orbit around the sun. I mean, can you really blame me for saying that such a miracle is silly? I mean, this wasn't the only instance. Later at dinner, I started talking about how I'd become I'd done a little bit of looking into Australian politics and how interesting their political atmosphere is at the moment. And I covered this in my video on universal basic income. And in fact, I was talking with him about this very subject, about how people in Australia would rather have the welfare overhaul than having um a balanced budget, having a budgetary surplus. Well, I mean, this isn't that big of a deal. Personally, I was just, it's an experiment that's never been run. You know, sure, there have been communism and socialism, and various level of socialism have produced powerful states. Communist China is one of the most powerful countries in the world, though arguably it is becoming less and less communist and more. There's more capitalism and more socialism going on. It's a socialist capitalist country, I'd say, closer to now. It's very slowly adopting welfare and social policies from the West. And I think that it'll take some time, but I think that China may become one of the most powerful socialized states in the world. I think they've got a lot of potential. Um, the so I was discussing this with him, and I mentioned that Finland is already planning to implement the policy next year in 2017, and that Switzerland was gonna make a vote on it, I believe, later this year. Um, there's there is so then I was simply saying that it was interesting. I would like to see how this turns out. He asked me how it was going to work, and honestly, I hadn't looked up how Finland was planning on implementing their universal basic income policy. Though now looking it up, I can tell you quite. Okay, this one's actually about Swiss. The Swiss model, the Swiss referendum suggest here. Let me just switch over to away from the hypnotizing electric sheep. We can see that the referendum initiator suggests a basic monthly income of 2,500 Swiss francs for adults and 625 Swiss francs for children as a working example. This is mostly because of the high cost of living in Switzerland, and that it's, that he compares it to Europe and UK in terms of income. And in terms of the US, which isn't represented on here, though is a very interesting case to study. This even this the amounts that they give would be between $1,800 and $2,500 a month. No, 1,500 I'd say between $1,500 and $2,500 a month. Yeah, in the United States per person, which is an interesting. That's very interesting. Now, I did a little bit of calculation, a few calculations myself in the universal basic income video, and I definitely recommend going to check that out to, you know, check my math. Some I said that we could give every citizen at least $500 without, if we had, it's like if we got the some of our other welfare projects and moved to a single payer healthcare system. Now, when I discussed this with my dad, I didn't say anything about me agreeing or disagreeing with them, though he already knew that I agreed with the idea of a universal basic income, though not for the reason that he believes that I do. He believes that I am falsely afraid. I'm afraid that the employment environment will change too quickly with mass automation from something like the creation of a full AI, that the singularity will hit and the global economy will be wrecked from unemployment and insufficient welfare systems and such. That it's But he thinks that people should just should work hard and get paid what they whatever corporations should pay them. He thinks that a living wage should be supplied. That if you don't like working at a company because they don't pay you what you think you're worth, that you should move to another company. And that clearly, and that his corporation that he works for pays him based on his productivity. And that there are a number of other corporations in the world who do the same. And that clearly that is the way that society should move. I tried pointing out that there are corporations that will not move to that. There are corporations that systematically oppress their employees because they can, and because their employees have no other options. And these people may be in even more trouble soon if there's, depending on the level of automation that occurs. And that's another thing that I'll get into as well. But there's a lot that needs to happen. And I admitted this. I said that while we have the financial capability of implementing a universal basic income with a few simple overhauls, and it would be quite simple. The system would be very, very simple, at least for the universal basic income. But I was very interested. He gave a thought experiment about him working 40 productive hours per week, and now that he theoretically has this extra income each month, that he can work 35 productive hours a week and still receive the same amount of comfort, and how that means that productivity will decrease. Well, what he fails to understand is that while he would be satisfied working at 35 hours a week, which he might be, that actually may improve his mental health, which is one of the social benefits that I talked about when I was discussing with him, is that if you feel overworked, if you are overworked because you don't have a choice, you can work a little bit less, enjoy your job more, or do a job that you would like to do but could not normally feasibly do. He was like, oh, so you want people to become more artists and painters and stuff and be supported by the state? And I was like, well, not just artists, though art and philosophy and books and entertainment, I believe, are going to become incredibly even more important industries in the future. there's the point where he lost me is that it's like where he really lost me, where I knew it was the end of the conversation. I was talking with him about this subject, and I asked a few questions. That's all that I want to know. He told me that it was communist bullshit, that my ideas were communist bullshit, that they never worked, that it's already been tried in history, though I would definitely say that universal basic income is not communism. In fact, it is so not communism that libertarians who hate communism will back universal basic income. Even a third party candidate here in the United States, Gary Johnson, supports universal basic income. I'd half consider voting for him based on that merit alone if some of his other policies didn't concern me. There's and at that point, that ad hominem attack, which wasn't even the worst of it, he said that he basically claimed that he didn't need evidence, that he was more credible than I am, that he didn't have to support his position, that he's been around the block, so to speak. He's been to other countries, and then the worst put down. The worst put down was attacking my credibility based on the amount of wealth that I have produced. He asked me if I had produced any wealth. I mean, of course, I said no, because I had a very limited, as somebody who is broke, a very limited view of the term wealth. And in fact, in that conversation, I learned that his consideration of wealth is much broader, in fact, and that I have contributed a fair amount to humanity already, including being part of a drug trial for the treatment of a colon cancer drug that was approved just this last year by the FDA. My sacrifice to science by participating in a clinical trial is going to help literally save people's lives. Now, was I doing the research? No, I was a I was a guinea pig. But it's like the guinea pigs have a role. They're important to the process too. Instead of saying that, oh, but these single payer healthcare systems and this socialism doesn't work, these are the numbers that I have to prove it, or here, let me look up some numbers for you. Instead, he proceeded to use an anecdote. One of his coworkers lives in the UK and his coworker said that he hated the healthcare system and that it was awful and that he had to wait forever, and basically just complained about it and said that it's awful. And that didn't sound quite right to me, because I've had conversations with people from Canada, from the United Kingdom, from other countries in the European Union, even a few people from Australia and New Zealand. And I had heard that the healthcare actually was not that bad, that there was a lot of merit. That there was a lot of merit to their systems, that they were easy to use, that there wasn't a lot of complexity. It encouraged people to go to the doctors early for preventative care. And so what he was saying didn't really make sense. And I tried to press him on it, to say that, hey, that's a pretty bold claim to make, and that's just an anecdote from one guy who, let's be honest, probably shares a lot of your views. Oh, so So I looked it up. I looked it up. I mean, honestly, I didn't know for sure what the statistics looked like. Though, in on Wikipedia, I to get an overview of the situation. Um, Let me look it back up now. Healthcare in the United Kingdom on Wikipedia. We move away from the sheeps for a minute. Simply looking at the second paragraph, the performance of the NHS across the UK can be measured for the purpose of making international comparisons. In a 2014 report ranking developed country healthcare systems, the United Kingdom was ranked the best healthcare system in the world overall and in the following categories: quality of care, i.e., effective, safe, coordinated, patient oriented, access to care, efficiency, and equity, and that their palliative care has also been ranked as the best in the world, which takes a number. It's a multidisciplinary approach to medical care with people with serious illness, you know, chronic pain, physical stress, AIDS, cancer, things like that, and immediately knew after literally like 15 seconds of internet research that his claim was bullshit. It just blew my mind. I mean, you can't just use an anecdote from a guy that you work with who happens to live in the UK. Now, does that lend some credibility to your claim? It may lend a little bit. It may lend a little bit. For example, if I were to comment on Australia's healthcare system, I wouldn't have a lot of credibility because I'm an American and I've never been to Australia. Though I've heard a little bit about the healthcare system, such as the mixture between privatization and public care. That people who go in on public care make a co-payment that goes to the government, which then goes back into the system to support the healthcare system. But the thing is that you can see just from some sheer numbers. So, we can check the CDC, number of deaths, the infant mortality rates. And then we can go to the Office for National Statistics in the UK and see their own numbers. Now, these numbers in particular are just from England and Wales because there's apparently the statistics for Scotland and Ireland are on another site. Or they say that, I think, find it later in the article. I think there's a link to more comprehensive statistics. But you can see that while there is an increase in the sheer number of deaths, that the deaths per capita is staying roughly the same. Like here, look, this age standardized mortality rates. You can see that from 2001, 2015, that it has steadily declined. That people are dying older and that there are fewer deaths occurring per capita. And this shows to me that there is actually that their healthcare system is improving the health of their citizens. That's really all you need to know. That it works. It may not be perfect. In fact, in this Wikipedia article, my dad mentioned the amount of time that it takes, that you could be waiting 4 hours in an ambulance or something like that. That there's a gap in the number of healthcare practitioners. Yes. In 2015, that had an outstandingly poor record of preventing ill health, and that hospitals in the UK were now so short-staffed and needing 75,000 more doctors and nurses to match standards in similar countries that people were dying because a chronic lack of investment. Now, what does that mean? It means that they need to put more money into their healthcare system, which shouldn't be a problem. As a percentage of GDP, the United States spends 16.4% of its GDP on healthcare. The OECD average is 8.9%. And in 2013, their percentage, the proportion of GDP spent on healthcare in the UK was 8.5%. If we kept, it's simple. If we kept this same level of spending on healthcare, but had a copay system that, made sense, we can see here that the number of people who die per 100,000, while this says 821.5 deaths per 100,000 population, that's not gender or age standardized. So it's kind of hard to compare. The easiest one to compare is the infant mortality rate, which is 5.96 deaths per 1,000 live births, which is, there's, compared to the infant mortality rate of 3.9 deaths per 1,000 live births in 2015 in the UK. More babies are living in the UK than they are in the United States. If you expected... Now, my dad did say that the United States has the worst healthcare system in the world. It has the worst of both worlds, privatized and public. And in some senses, I'd care to agree with him. Personally, I'd rather move to a government single-payer health system. But my dad doesn't like to deal with evidence. And since he doesn't like to deal with evidence, and he doesn't like to deal with numbers, and he doesn't like to deal with statistics, he won't change his mind. Even if the numbers say that having a public healthcare system is more beneficial to the population. He'll say no. The economy being strong and growing the economy will help far more. And that this, it's like that socialized medicine, universal basic income, it's all communism bullshit. Well, /rant. I've got plenty of other things that I could talk about, but those are topics for another video. If you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, or tell me what you think down below in the comments. You should check out my other video on universal basic income, and I'll probably do more on the subject, as well as a number of other subjects that I've got to rant about. This one actually ran quite a bit longer than I anticipated, but I'm pretty upset. So, Anyways, I'll probably be back tomorrow. Woo! And tell me what you think of the sheep.